Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Property Investing 2.0. As usual, I'm your host Raj Changadu, and today's guest is none other than Ranjan Bhattacharya. Ranjan is a successful property investor with over 30 years experience and is considered to be one of the UK's leading property experts. He has built an extensive portfolio of residential and commercial property in the London area. He is an author and hosts the UK's largest #1 property meetup, the Baker Street Property Meet. Today we discuss the current challenges in the property market, the transition of the high street, and the biggest commercial property investment opportunities presenting themselves today. We hope you enjoy the show and enjoy this sit down with Ranjan Bhattacharya. Okay, so here we go. Ranjan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here. Well, be here, as it were, rather than where you are, but be here. Yes.
Yeah, in as much capacity as we can be these days with all the social distancing rules that have been going on. But I find that we're getting quite used to it relatively anyway, getting used to these Zoom calls and these technical issues that come up sometimes. But I'm thrilled to have you with us today, Ranjan. There's a lot going on at the moment, a lot to discuss. There's so many changes, there's so many challenges that people are having, but there's also plenty of opportunities that are going to be on the horizon for people, and that's where we want to focus today. But before we get too much into current affairs, for the select few people who might not know who you are in the property investment world, can you tell us a little bit about your story? How did you get into property?
Oh, well, property has always fascinated me. As a kid, I was a big fan of the game Monopoly and spent hours of school holidays playing Monopoly. And it just makes a lot of sense. You know, you buy income generating assets and, everything in Monopoly is a metaphor for life. If you go around the board and just take a salary when you pass go and don't buy any assets that produce any income, all you got is £200 when you pass in, and you will get in jail, you'll get fines, and money will go. You'll land on other people and pay rent, and you'll end up with next to nothing. The strategy of going around the board, just relying on salary and the odd community chest you've won a beauty contest, does not cut it in Monopoly. You have to buy income producing assets. And when you buy those income producing assets, it helps to do a bit of site assembly and get a number of assets of the same color. And it helps to develop them with houses to increase your cash flow, to increase your rent roll, and then sort of move on to hotels. And the more of those you have, the more you accumulate and the more options you have, and eventually you win out of the game. So Monopoly seemed pretty logical to me. And as soon as I could, I went to do that in real life. So I did a computer science degree. I graduated from university. I managed to get a job at Accenture, and it was a very good graduate program. And on the basis of that job offer, I got a 100% mortgage before I started work. And at that time, it was the 1990s recession. But if you had a good job, then you could still get credit. So I lucked out on that. And in the world of management consulting, you get moved around a lot. So I got posted on assignments at other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And I found very quickly I rarely stayed in this house that I bought. So obviously it made sense to rent out. Obviously I was looking to optimize cash flow, so I did rooms. And then I kept buying pretty much every few months, buy a property. And my strategy was relatively simple. Because I had a very demanding job, I wanted to generate the maximum cash flow I could from every rooftop I owned. So I wanted as few rooftops as possible to generate the maximum cash flow as possible. So I had less hassle and I could spend time in my career because I didn't hate my job, I loved it. And that whole approach, I think, stood me very well. Because I know from the many, many people I talk to in the property industry, when I look at our rent roll and I compare it to others who produce the same sort of rent roll, some of these guys have got 25 staff, we've got 4. Yeah. So the idea of generating maximum rent roll from the minimum number of rooftops and the minimum number of tenancies means that ultimately your costs of managing that asset base are relatively low.
Yeah, so the aim was to keep it as efficient as possible, make sure, like you said, you're maximizing the use of staff that you have, but maximizing the income from the tenants. But I guess that's letting out per room. Was that the route that you went there from that point of view?
A lot of room lets, and a lot of, I mean, now, I quit my job in 2001. I went full time then, but then I did a lot more developing as opposed to just buying assets to rent out. So the developing has been developing blocks of flats and retaining them for rental. So again, I look at that as one rooftop. So it's quite an optimized cash flow. You've got full control of the communal areas. You've got full control of the freehold, so you can drive up the asset value and the rental value. You're not just waiting for the freeholder to carpet the front area, which looks estate or anything like that. You've got full control over everything. And that helps you achieve optimum cash flows. I mean, when I started in property, I did all the below market value stuff, targeting motivated sellers and the like. And I worked with a few tired landlords. I was in my 20s, and I'd meet these 67-year-olds with 2 or 3 properties, and I'd strike a deal with them to basically buy their properties over a period of time. And they were all tired. The landlord was tired, the property was tired, and all of that. And after doing a few of these, a couple of things dawned on me. What am I doing that's different, that I'm not going to be a tired landlord when I'm their age? It's all very well, but am I really cleverer than them that I'm going to not be equally knackered? Because that led me to a realization that residential property is great as an entry point. I mean, at that time, you couldn't enter into commercial property. You had to start off with residential because the barriers to entry were so much lower for residential than they were for commercial property. Now it's pretty much equalized. The monetary barriers to entry for getting into residential and commercial is the same. It's just the skill base is different. People can watch Homes Under the Hammer and think they can buy a residential property. There's nothing equivalent really to get people into the commercial space. So I started with residential, graduated into commercial property. These days people don't have to do that. But the attraction with commercial property was that I never really met a tired commercial landlord. I think the first commercial landlord was some guy. He was nearly 80 years old, and he was telling me about his McDonald's drive-through that he has somewhere in the Midlands, and it generates 100 grand a year rent. And commercial rents are paid quarterly in advance. So that's 4 rent payments, 4 checks. Think about the work involved in generating 100 grand of residential rent roll. How many tenants, how many rooms, how many monthly invoices, how many repairs, how many this, that, how many interactions do you have to have with your customer? Whereas commercial tenants, full repairing, insuring lease, you don't hear from them. And I soon discovered when I met up with property people that tired commercial landlords don't really exist in that way.
That's interesting that you say that. That I agree. I think there is a perceived higher barrier to entry with commercial properties. Like you said, there's not enough shows like Homes Under the Hammer for commercial properties, and maybe what's happened in the past, the difficulty of it in the past, has just carried on to today. I think now's a good time to compare commercial with residential in terms of, I mean, how do people value commercial as opposed to residential? Because that's one thing that's quite different, isn't it?
Oh, yes. I mean, it depends. And that's the official answer. Um, when you go for a commercial mortgage um, with a commercial bank, you need to ask the bank, well, how do they value the commercial property? Some banks will, and because every bank will send a terms of reference to the valuer, and they will value those properties according to those terms of reference. So with some banks, they're looking for a 90-day fire sale value. What will it be worth if you have to get rid of it in 90 days? Some people will value it based on the rent roll. They will look at a combination of the rent roll, how many years that rent roll is guaranteed for in the future, in other words, length of lease remaining, and strength of covenant. So how strong is the tenant? If it's a high street multiple, that might be more better than a mom and pop. And they will factor those sort of things into account. Some lenders will consider the development potential and the unrealized potential. So it varies. The more traditional way is to value it based on its existing rent roll. But that is only relevant if you are buying it as a buy-to-let investment. So if you're buying a buy-to-let investment, commercial property, then you would look at what yield it generates. What the price you pay, what yield. You'd expect a higher yield if there is less years remaining on the lease. It's a more undesirable area where it'd be vacant for longer if you were to have to let it out, and if it's a weaker tenant. But you would expect a lesser yield if it's a strong area where if the tenant were to go bust, it's easy to relet. The tenant that is in there is strong and has a strong business, and the length of the lease is longer. So there's a sort of yield spectrum. But I don't buy properties like that because I'm not interested in stuff like that. I'm not buying commercial property for commercial buy-to-let. I'm buying stuff that I can add value to. I'm buying stuff that I can repurpose. So with that, the valuation is completely different.
Okay, so before we go too far into that, let's rewind a little bit. Let's streamline and focus on certain types of commercial properties. So people want to know where the opportunities are, and some commercial properties that could be in small commercial properties where the opportunities are. That could be shops. It could be in the high street. Now, there's a lot of high street changes going on at the moment. It's been in the press for the last few years, and more recently with this pandemic. Is the death of the high street coming, as people are saying, or is it simply a transition and we're going through a new phase? What are your thoughts on a whole on where the high street is going?
Well, it's a transition. We've got too many shops in the UK, and it's going to change. And we are seeing, the headlines are all about the changes. The headlines are dominated by shop closures, and a lot of those shops are difficult to repurpose. Just have a think, if you like, of what you could do with a Debenham store. It's just too big. They have limited windows, 3 or 4 floors, very deep, large floor plates. They're designed for selling products off shelves. If you take a former bank building, for example, banks are not as big as Debenham stores. They're usually very attractive buildings. They're normally in center of high footfall areas. They have windows, and they're easy to repurpose to other uses and also residential uses. So the problems are the properties which are not easy to repurpose. Of course, Into, the shopping center chain, has collapsed. How would you repurpose an Into shopping center without demolishing it? The betting industry is going through massive change. More than half of all betting shops will close. Just think of your local William Hill or Coral betting shop, and if that were to become available, it's very easy to repurpose. It's a smallish unit, plenty of windows. You can easily put a couple of flats above. You can perhaps cut the shop up into a smaller shop and then retain a flat at the back. It's very, very easy to repurpose. And because they're smaller shops, they're easy to get commercial tenants in. So what we're going to see is obviously these larger stores, they need to be demolished. There's oversupply in the large indoor shopping centres. And more people will, the other big problem is we have too many secondary parades. I mean, if you take London, for example, in the 1930s, there used to be individual towns and villages. And then all the towns and villages got joined together by shops on every road. Every road that links one town to another is full of shops. So you got this mass, which is all, you've got some primary areas in the towns, but each town is linked together by secondary parades of shops. Now those are completely in oversupply, and what's going to happen is that so many of those are going to get repurposed into residential usage. But as you bring more people, you have a need for shops that have services to offer that people who live in the immediate vicinity want. Because most of these places, I mean, we do an awful lot of commercial to residential conversion. I put a lot on my YouTube channel, case studies and all of that. But I did my first retail to residential conversion in 2006. Sorry, 2005. I got planning permission in 2005 and we started works in 2006. That was under planning permission. That was 7 years before it became permitted development. So we've done commercial to residential conversions before it became permitted development under planning. Then in 2013, it became permitted development, and now it's getting easier with the forthcoming changes. So there's been an oversupply of commercial properties for a long time. It's become easier now to repurpose those. And what we find is that when you bring more people into an area to live, because commercial properties are being repurposed, it's difficult to provide those people with parking, that you're often building units where the people living in them don't have a car anyway. So they need local services. So all of a sudden you get the local supermarket, the very local Metro, Tesco type thing, hair cutting, coffee, and all of this. It all becomes, the kind of shops become quite different. So it moves away from selling product to moving towards selling services and convenience product that people just need. I need a bottle of wine because someone's coming over for dinner. Pop over the road, get one kind of thing. It becomes like that. So it becomes more of a community type of setup in terms of the retail that remains. So we're going to see a transition. I mean, I've kind of seen this. One of the first areas where I did a lot of commercial property was in North London, where the A1 is. Now the A1 that goes through Highgate, Archway, Holloway, down into Islington. It's a very, very busy road. And in the late 1990s, 2000s, what they did is they implemented a red route. And the red route meant no one can park a car. And people were saying then that that was the death of all shopping on the A1. Any shop that had customers who needed to park outside, go in the shop, get something, stick it in the boot and go, they were stuffed overnight. So shops became empty. There was oversupply of those shops and they were easy pickings because the vendors didn't know how to value them. The vendors didn't know what they were worth. They own these shops. There's no tenant in there at the moment. There's no tenant that wants those shops. What do they value them at? They'll take what they can get. Now, I took the call that we could repurpose those shops under planning permission. We could convert some of that space into residential use. We could give the residential market some valuable flats that it needs in well-located areas, which incidentally are, I mean, a family doesn't want to necessarily live above a shop, but young folks, single people, couples are more than happy to because they're close to everything. And then you suddenly start to put more people on those parades. And what we tend to do is cut the shop down into a much smaller size. So that becomes very attractive to starter businesses because there's so many people that want to open small coffee shops or nail bars or barbers shops or even estate agents, all sorts of different small shops that they can get started in. And when we take a shop and convert the rear into residential, we make a smaller shop at the front. We make the shop small so that it comes out of business rates. Because if the rateable value is less than 15,000, you don't pay business rates on it. So it becomes very attractive to start a business. So what we were part of on the Holloway Road was a gradual transition from, because the red route came in, it meant that people could not sell product. This was late 1990s, early 2000s. People couldn't sell product. So we saw a transition to residential, and we also saw a transition in terms of the types of shops that would succeed there. Now it's all virtually full occupancy. So when I talk about this, I've got a form on it, I've seen it, and I see a similar kind of thing now happening nationally. The trigger is not the red route. The trigger now is basically the internet and Amazon and shopping that people are doing online. That's meaning that stores that sell product are redundant. And whereas I had to do conversions the hard way, I mean, applying for planning permission is a pain in the ass. Now, what I was doing under planning permission is permitted development. You don't have to tell you have to notify them, but it's a checklist of stuff and you know you're going to get it. And that gives certainty. And here's the thing, and this is what I kind of talk a lot about on my YouTube and with the case studies that we do, is this. And this is why they're giving the planning reforms. The government knows there's a massive oversupply of shops and offices. And an interesting stat is that 30 years ago, 40% of new dwellings were provided by small-scale developers. Today, only 12% of new housing is provided by small-scale developers. Why? It's planning. You know, you cannot finance anything if you've got complete uncertainty. If you bring certainty to the process so that small developers know that I buy a shop, hey, I can put 2 flats above, I can put a flat in the back. You've got certainty. You can finance it. Because the big guys ain't interested in repurposing a William Hill. The big guys are interested in a former BHS store. They'll knock it down and build a 150-room hotel. But they aren't interested in the shut down William Hill office. It's too small. So who's going to do that? You know, so the government kind of recognizes this. They want to bring back smaller developers into the game. The only way they can do that is to bring some certainty into the planning process. You know, so it is an open goal of opportunity, because many people will be thinking, hey, I watch Homes Under the Hammer, I get how to do a 3-bed semi, new bathroom, kitchen, liquor paint, this, that, and the other. Commercial property, I don't understand the language, don't understand this, don't understand that. And the big guys just simply aren't interested. So there's this whole open goal of opportunity for the smaller developer to just step up to the plate and get on with it.
And that's it, isn't it? It goes back to lowering that barrier to entry, or helping people understand that with permitted development, you don't have to go through all the planning hoops that you had to go through before. And that, like you said, that put off a lot of people. I mean, what should be sometimes a few months for a planning application didn't work out that way. It wasn't necessarily the local council's fault or the local authority's fault, but it was just the process in a whole was outdated, really, and it really needed an uplift, a boost in this new reform, hopefully, that's coming into play.
Sound very sympathetic to planning departments.
Say again, sorry?
Sound very sympathetic to planning departments.
I'm trying to be very political during this time, yes, of course, but there's times where I haven't been so. I could assure you of that. So, going back to someone now who's maybe done 1 or 2 small residential projects, looking to to do a commercial project, what are some of the factors and rules that they need to consider when looking at these new properties to repurpose, these old commercial buildings that have a bit of a large ground floor, perhaps, maybe 2 flats above? What are some of the things that they need to look out for? You've touched on a few already, but maybe we can elaborate a bit further.
It's really about learning the permitted development rules inside out and knowing how what the areas of ambiguity are. Because as I always say, where there's ambiguity, there's opportunity. And the other thing is, with the existing rules on the table, a lot of the opportunity comes from combining different rules on one particular site. And in some cases, choosing the best PD which applies to your particular scheme. And now there are going to be more of them. I mean, they're introducing a whole bunch of new PD rules very shortly. The existing PD rules are going to continue to remain in force for a further year. So you will have the opportunity, potentially, to pick and choose which PD is best for that particular site. And unlike residential property, everyone knows what can be done with a 3-bed semi. You only have to see a few episodes of Homes Under the Hammer, Sarah Beanie and that kind of stuff. We all know. But with commercial property, it's not entirely obvious. Everyone looking at it will have a different idea of how to generate cash flow from that site. And that's what it's all about. So I buy about half of all our commercial stock from auctions. Now, a lot of people say auctions are going silly price and all of that, and perhaps they are. But the reason why I'm successful at auctions, at commercial auctions, is this. Because what commercial auctions is about you knowing, what buying any commercial property is about you knowing exactly what you want to get out of it. So what's your plan for maximizing the cash flow? If you maximize the cash flow, you maximize its value. So if I've got a better plan for maximizing the cash flow on this building than you have, then I'll get a higher valuation on it, which allows me to pay more for it. And you only win at our auction if you pay more. And you can only pay more if you've got a better plan than the next guy. So you have a better plan by fully understanding the possibilities. And that means the permitted development rules and how they can be used from an entrepreneurial point of view to maximize the value of a site.
I was going to see if there's a possible case study you could go through of a small project that you've done, maybe that you've picked up at auction, and maybe some of the changes that you did make for that particular project. Is there anything that springs to mind that you've done in the past that you can share with us from that point of view?
One property we bought at auction was a bank building, and it's basically a double-fronted bank branch. And the under permitted development rules, because it's 2 addresses next to each other, most people were looking at this from the permitted development that allows you to put 2 flats above each unit. But if you know that the bank used the first and second floors as offices and they were designated as B1 office use, then that means you can convert those into as many flats as you like. You're not limited to 2 above each one. So because this is an area of London where micro studios work, by applying a different PD to the site that other people were looking at, we're looking at 8 micro apartments instead of 4 flats. And that changes the cash flow and earning potential of that building. And that changes what you can do with it. So a lot of people don't understand. And there's just, I do some specialist training on this, and we go through this on a couple of days, but there's a lot really to cover. And people don't understand the ambiguity sometimes in the rules. Like you can convert office space or all the internal space that comprises an office into residential. And if that includes a roof void, that's included. You need planning permission to put a dormer on, which you will get, but the roof space is included in what you can get PD on. A lot of people don't know that, so they just leave it.
And that's it. It comes back to education, doesn't it? Because a lot of people might think, well, with all these permitted development changes and PD changes, why wouldn't the landlords do this themselves? Why wouldn't they make these changes now? They don't have to go through planning. But it goes back to what you said, that they don't understand the ins and outs of the permitted development. Would you say that was fair enough to say?
They might not know it, but here's what happens, and here's what happened in 2013. Vendors don't know really the extent of the PD, and in 2013, they didn't know for a good 3 years or so. It was only until 2015, 2016, say, that vendors understood permitted development, and if you're looking at an office building, not only did they understand it, they've gone along and got someone to draw up some plans for residential conversion, got the permitted development, and sold the site with PD for 30 flats. That took 3 or so years for that to happen. I believe this time round, it'll take a year and a half. So there is a year and a half of opportunity to fully understand these rules and get out there before these things get built into the price. What happens is it takes some time because people understand it at a basic level, but what they don't understand is the ambiguity and how things can be combined and used on one site and how far you can push things. Because when you write the rules, when government write the rules, they can't write them with every single property in mind all over the country. There are always exceptions, and there are always properties you can do slightly more with under the rules just by pushing the envelope a little bit. And it takes some time before people fully get that.
No, I think you're right. Because, like you said, with office to residential, when that came out a few years back, like you said, it took a while before landlords started pricing accordingly, didn't they? They almost upped the value of those commercial properties, even though they had no tenants, had been empty for a while. They now said, well, even if we haven't done the permitted development changes, we know that can be done, and we're going to price it at this price now. So there's that window of opportunity that you're talking about that people need to take advantage of. And would you say that's what's happening at the moment now?
Absolutely. Because there is plenty of uncertainty, and even with what they've announced, people don't fully understand that. There are all sorts of get-outs. So it's not fully understood. It won't be fully understood for some time. They've announced a lot of stuff so far, but they've announced very little in actual detail. We think it's going to go, hopefully it'll go a certain way, but a lot of the detail hasn't yet been announced.
And that's what people are waiting for, aren't they? At the end, they're a bit more detail, a bit more understanding of what these changes will actually mean.
I mean, the reason why I'm relatively on top of it is we have a commercial property portfolio, and we estimate that with the permitted development that's been announced, we can add 15,000 square foot of space to our commercial property portfolio across all the properties that we have. And that is a combination of knocking things down and rebuilding, adding a couple of floors to an office building, making lots of flats above, behind shops. So we've got all these opportunities within our portfolio. We've got various planning consultants looking at those sort of options. We're planning to build out a lot of that stuff. So that's why when I kind of get to grips with this stuff, I'm not just doing it from a theoretical perspective. We're looking at doing that because from the point, going back to my original strategy, it actually makes sense to own as much space, have as much cash flow from as fewer rooftops as possible. And in London, if you already own the land, or anywhere in the southeast, I mean, the building that I'm in now is an office building in St Albans. Under permitted development, we can add 2 floors to it. So the existing, I mean, there's 2 floors to an office building. That's not bad.
I think that's an important point that I was going to touch on just then, and that is control and owning the asset is so important because like you said, with your existing portfolio, you don't have to look for any more rooftops. You have the rooftops that you can add value to at the moment. You can also look for new ones as well. But if you don't own the asset fully, you are limited probably to some of the changes that you might be able to do, I'm sure.
Yes.
So that seems like a very important point for people to take away from this, the fact that control and owning the asset is such an important route to go in the long haul.
Freehold is very important if you want to do commercial property repurposing.
Ranjan, I want to move on now to a different part of this podcast, and that is we've talked about opportunities, we've talked about successes of properties that you've bought, but is there a failure or any particular failures or mistakes that you've made in commercial property that have really helped you get to where you are today? Something that you've really learned and can share with us?
I don't think I've taken enough risk. I've been very, very cautious, and that's probably why I haven't dramatically failed on anything. I know that with hindsight, sometimes that caution has been a little bit extreme. And if I had pushed the boat out a little bit, it wouldn't have been a bad thing to do.
That's interesting to say. Yeah, I mean, when I say failure, it doesn't have to be a massive loss of money or anything like that. It could just be a mistake, that was corrected. But that's interesting that you felt that you haven't pushed the boat out enough. But then, don't you think it's better to obviously stay in the game over a long period of time? If you push it too far and something goes wrong, then you're out of the game completely. It's a lot more difficult to start up again, I would have thought.
Absolutely, and that's the other thing. Anything I do now is nothing I do now is more than 10% of the value of our overall stuff. I mean, Warren Buffett says that you should be looking to make your investments 10 to 15% of your overall worth, so that it pushes things a little bit, but doesn't push things too much. I've never been the one to sort of go after some fantastically large deal just for some vanity sense, which is the biggest thing that you've ever done. But you risk everything that you built up over that period of time for it.
And I think that's a great lesson. People automatically think developers and investors are huge risk takers. And what you're sharing right now is that's not always the case. There's calculation, there's strategy to what you're doing. And the more I talk to high-performing people like yourselves, they protect the downside as much as they can when they're taking on projects and taking on opportunities.
I think it depends where you are in life as well. When I was starting out, 100%, and I mean, I told you I bought my first place 100%, and I did it up with a 0% credit card, So when you're 21, you can do a little bit of stuff, and you can, because you've got plenty of time to recover, and you've got nothing to lose. When you've got something to lose, why bother? Why do it? Why risk that? It simply doesn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a follow-up question. You pretty much answered it there, but it was one I was going to answer a bit later, a bit of fun, and it gets interesting answers. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self when they were just about to embark on their property journey, is there any particular advice that you would give them when they're just starting out? Anything that they should focus on?
I think I would say to my younger self, back yourself more. back your intuition, back your gut. Because I think I found it's been right more often than it's been wrong. And I'd say to my younger self, look, you've done the research, you've done the due diligence, the numbers stack up, back yourself.
That's interesting. Yeah, like you said, at some point when you've done all the due diligence and the numbers and they stack up, you have to rely on that gut feeling, don't you? That says, yes, this is right. You should go ahead with it. And without that, sometimes a lot of money can get left on the table, a lot of deals. And I'm sure that has happened to people. It certainly happened to me in the past, where you go, oh, I wish I was in that one. I knew it stacked and I didn't go for it for some reason. And when you go against your intuition, ends up leaving a little bit of a wound and a sore, doesn't it? Sometimes.
Yeah. And don't take check everything out for yourself. Sometimes you just got to check everything out for yourself. I remember a few years ago, I was a bit stupid, really. I was very interested in an office building, and the office building was in an area of Islington, and looking at buying it. At that time, Islington Council had brought in an Article 4 restricting office to residential conversions in that area. So I made some inquiries to the council, all this sort of stuff, and they'd said, yeah, Article 4. So I didn't go ahead with it. What I didn't realize was that the exact way the Article 4 process works, when the council gets the right to impose an Article 4, they have to give everyone 12 months notice of it coming into effect. So what the council told me is they'd won the Article 4, but what they weren't forthcoming with is that it was still under the 12 months notice before it came into effect. So in theory, that building could have been bought and converted and applied for, because although they'd have applied for Article 4, it hadn't come into effect yet. So I think they brought that in about 2015. So always check things out for yourself. It's very important to do proper due diligence and that kind of stuff.
I want to move on now. We've only got a couple more questions now, Ranjan. I want to be mindful of your time. You've been in property for over 30 years. You would have seen a lot of ups and downs and had a number of successes. Are there any particular behaviors and habits and routines that you do on a daily or weekly basis to help you stay motivated, focused, maybe to de-stress? Going back to what you said at the start, you didn't want to be one of those older landlords who isn't still hungry and just wants to give up on it all. How do you stay focused and motivated on a weekly and daily basis?
I think I always wake up early, wake up at 5.
Oh, wow.
As I've got a little bit older, I think, unlike when I was much younger, I think health is far more important. If you don't have health, you don't have anything, really. So I wake up at 5, I get a lot of shit done, I get a lot of my emails done, but my desk at home is one of these standing desks with one of these walking machines underneath. So, I'm hammering through emails and stuff like that, but I'm getting my 10,000 steps in, and I'm at home, but I'm still getting my stuff done. But looking after, and it does focus you, actually. When you stand up and work and you're doing some activity at the same time, it does focus you.
So let me just understand, you actually have a walking machine underneath the desk, so you're walking whilst you're working. Is that what you're saying?
It's like a treadmill, but it's designed for walking.
That's quite interesting. I've not seen that before. Yeah.
I'll get you a picture sometime. But
yeah.
On YouTube, but they're just for walking. And the desk is height adjustable, so I can put it into standing up mode or sitting down mode. So I normally just put it in standing mode, because if the desk is in standing mode, you got your elbows at a position where you can put them on the desk and walk that you're getting your 10,000 steps.
Yeah, so much like you would at the front of a treadmill, you put your hands on it sometimes, but you can do that with a desk and carry on walking. Talk about multitasking at the end of the day. But
all about multitasking, it gets your stuff done. It does keep you focused a little bit. But I think I think that doing the sort of physical activity just keeps you sharp and helps you focus on everything else. If you don't do that, you can't really, be on top of your game and all the rest of it. I think it's very, very important.
I agree. I think you said it in one sentence, that if you don't have health, you almost don't have anything. And I think that has to be top priority at some point for everyone, or has to be factored into their day or their life in some capacity.
Yes.
So I completely agree with you there. Last question for me, and that is, I wonder if there's any particular strategies in the near future that you would particularly avoid, possibly. And what I mean by that is it doesn't mean that's necessarily a bad strategy, but it might have some short-term challenges in the near future that I think people might need to be aware of. Is there any strategies that you wouldn't go near at all at the moment? It's a bit of a loaded question, isn't it, that one?
The stuff I see on YouTube. Rent-to-rent, deal packaging, serviced accommodation. Let me just give you a quick fire on all of them, really.
Okay.
Rent seems balmy at this phase of the market. The market is full of opportunities. You've got motivated sellers, distressed assets. You've also got a recession. This is the time to buy. These are the times where in 5 years' time, you look back and think, I wish I bought. I mean, who does not wish they bought in 2009? So we're now seeing a repeat of 2009 circumstances. So what the hell do you want to do, renting someone else's place and then trying to make a living at it? You're just being a lettings agent. Deal packaging, rubbish. The fact is that if you find a deal, the money will find you. I have just spent last week. I was filming for Property Elevator, which is going to be on Sky TV in the autumn. So it's a pitching show, like Dragon. So people, we filmed 4 episodes, all back to back, and we had property people coming along, pitching us their deals. These people need funding. And by the way, more than half the deals that were pitched got funded. So it's actually amazing TV. And it'll be on Sky, it'll be on our YouTube channel. People can catch it there. But the point I'm trying to say is these are entrepreneurs who found a deal. And if you find a great deal, then you can find the backing to do it. Most people saying, oh, you can make money through deal packaging are saying, find some rubbish on Rightmove and find some investor that doesn't know Rightmove exists. Well, where are you going to find that? That is not a deal. A deal is something that you find off market. One of the guys, a very young guy actually, he pitched on the show that we've just done, and he basically did some Facebook advertising in his local area, and he found some guy responded, and he's got this property that's been squatted in, and it's in a right old mess, and basically he wants shot of it quickly. He's got no financing on it. He's owned it for 30 years, and he needs shot of it quickly. Now, this guy did not have the money, even though it was a very distressed price. So he found out we were shooting. He literally rang up the producers about 2 days before we were shooting, got on the show, and he got funding to finance that deal. And it's a nice little split. You see it on the telly. It's about finding the goddamn deal. If you find the deal and it makes sense, the numbers make sense, you find someone to back it. Why do you want to package it up? Because it's a duff shit deal. If you can't do it yourself, then you give it to someone else. It's absolute rubbish.
I agree that a great deal will always find the money. In fact, I put that out last week on my podcast. It was one of the lessons that I've really learned in property, that a great deal will always find the money. What was the name of that show, Ranjan, that you were saying again?
Property Elevator.
Property Elevator. And that will be on Sky in the autumn, did you say?
On Sky in the autumn, and we'll be putting it out on our YouTube as well. So I'm going to do what they call, because there are 5 angels. I'm one of the angel investors on the show, and I'll be putting each pitch out with my commentary, for what it's worth, on our YouTube. So that'll be an interesting perspective of the whole thing.
Yeah, certainly, definitely something for people to watch. That's great.
Great learning.
Yeah, for all levels at the end of the day. Every deal comes with its own challenges, its different learning areas, and I think you can learn at all levels, can't you, from any deal, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's brilliant. I mean, I've never fully understood the deal packaging thing. I think it's a little bit of a myth. At the end of the day, what people seem to be promoting is find something on Rightmove and sell it to an investor. If it's not selling on Rightmove, why would genuine deals come from off market? And the people that do it put a lot of marketing into finding off market deals and leads, and then most of those people end up buying those properties themselves. Because if they're that much below market value, it makes sense to just do it yourself. And serviced accommodation right now, for all the obvious reasons, is exceptionally challenged. One of the biggest problems in if you're doing buy-to-let, let's say you're trying to rent out a 1-bedroom flat on a normal AST, one of the biggest challenges right now is that people who can't let them out on serviced accommodation are now going back into the normal long-term lettings market. And serviced accommodation properties tend to be of a higher standard than general AST properties. So they are sort of glutting that market in many towns, because serviced accommodation is absolutely dead in most areas, and the void rates are up, and it's just a mess. And the worst thing to do is rent-to-rent serviced accommodation. That's just a double whammy of pain. The strategies right and this is all the time in these recessionary times, is find distressed assets for motivated sellers, because you're doing it at a bit of a recession. So you've got 3 things kicking in to give you excellent value when you buy.
And that's it, isn't it? The more value you can factor in when you buy, the less money you're leaving in there, or you have to find from someone else to put in there. And, you keep it for long term, and you've got that capital growth forever. Whereas if you're understandably rent to rent and things like that, it is a service that you're creating more than a strategy to own assets, unless there's a way that you can factor in buying them at some point in the future. But that would be factoring in lease options as well, wouldn't it? I would have thought.
Yeah. Yes.
Ranjan, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure having you on. If people want to find you, Ranjan, where can they get hold of you?
Well, I would just go to YouTube, search Succeed in Property, or search my name, Ranjan, and then property. It'll come up. We've got I think we've built to about 24,000 subscribers in about a year. So we put out a lot of stuff on property investing. Basically my strategies, which work in today's market, and just try to keep it all current and real for people.
I agree. I mean, I've watched a lot of the content myself. I think it's fantastic. I really do recommend it to people to check that out on YouTube. When do people not watch YouTube these days? So go check that out, guys. You'll certainly pick up some nuggets of information. Ranjan, thank you once again for coming on the show, and hopefully we catch up again sometime in the near future.
Brilliant. Good to talk to you.
Cheers.